You're starting a major research project, a thesis for a BA or an MA, a dissertation, a major important paper. The first thing that you need to do is you need to have a good idea and to frame it properly. This is why I have other videos when I explain how you can think of a title, an abstract, a table of contents, and the introduction. It's important to start as early as possible so you have plenty of time later on. Once you've already done that, so you have a clear hypothesis, you have a plan, and you've started to work, the next element that determines about 50% of your grade is how many times did you manage to sit down in a concentrated way and work for at least half an hour. I tell this always to my students. Your grade at the end of a thesis will probably not depend on how brilliant and interesting you are. It will depend 50% if you have a good idea, well formulated and well organized, and 50% if you have managed to put in the work in a structured manner. Today, we will study a series of techniques that will help you to work in a disciplined way, work according to a plan, and stick to it. My name is Shai Lotan. I'm Associate Professor of International and Public Law at the University of Copenhagen Faculty of Law, and the purpose of this series of lectures is to help you improve your English and your research skills. The first rule in making a research plan is you need to have a lot of deadlines. It's not enough to have one deadline. You say, I finish a dissertation within 3 years, or I finish a thesis within a year or half a year. That's simply not enough. You need to break down this huge task to a lot of small deadlines. If you don't do that, you will never have enough discipline to actually put in the work continuously throughout the years. And always remember, good work is divided to many work sessions. So as many times as you can, hopefully every day, maybe even twice a day, you have a long work session in which you add on to your research. So it's very important to build your deadlines in a way that divides them to a lot of sub-tasks. So you tell to yourself, I will finish this chapter by the end of next week. I will finish this sub-chapter by the end of today. And that's something that I set in a particular deadline. You want to make deadlines that are realistic. You want as much as possible to stick to your deadlines as much as you can. If you don't stick to your deadlines, you need to give some feedback to yourself. It's more important that the work will be good than that the deadlines will be always kept. Sometimes there are things that are unexpected. You wanted to finish a certain part, you wanted to write 1,000 words, you realize, actually I need to read 3 papers to do that. It's not possible to do it in a day. That's fine. So write a feedback to yourself and explain, and I will explain how to do that, how to organize and archive your feedback towards the end of this video. But the idea is, if you did something that doesn't concur with the original deadline, there needs to be a reason for it. And you need to take account of it and write a proper feedback to explain why this happened. Now, one of the key ways to keep deadlines is to share them with others. Of course, the most important other person that you need to share deadlines with is your supervisor. If you are sharing a deadline with your supervisor, for example, you agree that in 3 weeks we will meet, so that in 2 weeks and 3 days from now, I will send you a draft. And then there's a much higher likelihood that you're going to actually do that. And of course, you also profit from the comments of the supervisor, but just having this commitment that you're going to do that because you already agreed on that with the supervisor increases the chances that you will keep the deadline and will give you more motivation and will help your discipline. So if you have a supervisor that is willing to read drafts, do that. If they're not willing to read drafts, you can just say, I will just send you the draft, and then we don't even have to have a meeting. At least I know that I did my part. If this is uncomfortable for the supervisor, and that's possible because sometimes supervisors many students and they would not like to see these drafts going on, then don't do that and try to discuss it, for example, with family members or friends and tell them, by the end of this week, I'm going to finish a chapter. It always increases the chances that you will actually do that. So sharing deadlines is important. And I think that deadlines have to be, down to ideally down to the level of every day, so you know what you will do every day, but at least to the level of every week, you need to know what you're going to complete in a week. In addition to these deadlines, where you have a whole plan going forward, and you can update this plan. So for example, you don't have to plan all the dissertation 3 years from now. You're not able to do that. Plan one chapter, the next chapter have some preliminary draft, and the following chapters can be just ideas that will then form later on. And afterwards, when you get to chapter 5, you will know when you write subchapter A and when you write subchapter B. You cannot know that when you're just writing chapter 1. In addition to these deadlines, I want you to give a lot of attention to the way you plan the day ahead. In a way, every day is a segment of work. It needs to be planned properly. And one of the tools that I find most useful for myself is that every single day, before I close my computer and go to sleep, I write to myself what I plan to do the next day. So I spend quite a few minutes doing that and thinking about that. And that's one of the most important commitment devices that you have, because it will give you discipline to do that. It will help you organize the morning to do that properly. And I really believe that it gets you mentally prepared. So if the last thing you think about before you go to sleep is how tomorrow is going to look like, somehow during your sleep, during your rest, you are getting yourself mentally ready for the next task. And then you're going to succeed in doing that. And ideally what I want you to do is I want you to write what you're going to do tomorrow. Focus particularly on what you're going to do in the first thing. I always write to myself, the very first thing in the morning, I'm going to do this. Afterwards, it's easy, because you're already in the rhythm of the working. But the first thing in the morning is the hardest. And that's why I always write it first, what I'm going to do first in the morning. And then I want you to memorize this list and think about it, so that tomorrow you will not even have to open it. I rarely open the list from the day before. Usually I remember them, and when I open the day, I know what I'm going to do first, I know what I'm going to do second, and things just flow after that. So that's a very, very important way to organize your tomorrow deadline, to prepare for tomorrow. So you have large deadlines, large chunks of work and chapters. If you write a dissertation, you usually have to declare this also to the faculty. In most of the schools that I worked in, you have to have some kind of a research plan like this. But then you have much more smaller deadlines that you organize, going all the way to the level of tomorrow. How am I going to prepare? How am I going to stick to the deadline? This is something that is very, very important. And if you practice it continuously, it will increase your chances to get a much better grade and to do much better work in your research projects. Now the morning has arrived. You prepared yourself the day before. You have a plan. You know what you need to do. The question is, how do you start? Now, for me, one of the most important schools for becoming a great scholar is actually in the gym, especially doing powerlifting. And I spoke about that in previous videos. I want to say a little bit more about that today. The key difficulty is starting a set. It's scary. It's physically scary. And it's very, very difficult to push yourself to do that, to get into a deadlift sweat when you're going to lift a very, very high weight and you can already feel the pain going through your body, to do a squat set where you basically up there with the huge weight on your shoulders and you're pushing yourself all the way to the limit, and the last few reps you can barely do that, or even a bench press, which for me always comes more naturally, but still just imagining 130 kilograms hanging above my head and struggling against it is something that I guess can give a lot of people pause, and people can try to postpone that. Now, one of the things that I hate about gyms today is that people go around and they would go around with their phones and check God knows what, the emails, the Twitter, news between the sets. And sometimes they would do it for 15 minutes, which is insane. For me, the time between the sets is dedicated to thinking and to mantras. And I would say to myself things like, if it's technical mantras, so things that I learned from my trainer in Israel about squats, for example. So it's You put your knees out, you have your back straight, you put the weight on your heels, you go down slowly, you go up fast. So these are kind of technical mantras. There's also mantras like I would say to myself, you did it before. You did it already 100 times before. It looks impossible, but every week you manage to do this set somehow. So I would do things like this to encourage myself. And I want you to try to do something similar like this when you sit in front of your computer. The first temptation is to go to news, Facebook, emails, Twitter, X, whatever it's called now, TikTok. That's the first temptation. I want you to fight against this temptation. I want you to use this time that you have, your quiet time, to give yourself mantras, to give yourself force, to tell to yourself, I can do this. I've written this before. I know it's going to be difficult, but I'm able to go through and I'm able to write this text in the best possible way. So get yourself ready to do that just like you would do before a set at the gym. And just like a set in the gym, you need to mark to yourself special times that require peak performance. When I wrote my dissertation, for example, I knew that every day counted for something, but there were some days that were more important than others. Why? Because some tasks are very difficult to spread out over several days, and if you're not concluded in one day, it will take you 5 days to do it and it will be done worse. So, for example, if I need to summarize or analyze a point in a particular judgment, so I organize everything in advance very carefully because I knew that I'm going to read this judgment from morning till night and focus everything on one day. You have to write a very important section or read a very important paper. All these things require preparation in advance. And just like in the gym, I know which sets are the hardest. Usually I have one very, very, very difficult set that challenges me per training, and I prepare for that more, and I prepare even more mantras than I would do for other sets, and I really get myself ready to do that. Now, what I want you to do on a regular day in which you don't have a very particular target to aim at, I want you to make yourself a target that will be divided according to one out of 3 possibilities. Okay, so one possibility is you tell to yourself that I'm going to work in a concentrated way without any interruptions for a set amount of hours or minutes. Okay, so it'll be like 3.5 hours is something that I can do and that I commit myself to. Another possibility is I'm going to focus on writing a certain amount of words. So I'm going to say I'm going to finish the day when I've written 1,000 words, 1,500 words. This is something that I can set myself as a goal. A third possibility is I'm going to finish the day when I finish a certain subpart from my thesis. So I'm going to define it this way. And you can alternate between these different mechanisms. Each has its own advantages. I think that the number of words is usually the most effective mechanism. It keeps you working effectively for longer times, but sometimes if there's a particular section, especially if it requires a lot of other research, that doesn't mean writing but does mean reading and thinking, or if you find that again it's a different tasks that are involved, then focus on the time or focus on the section that you have to write. So these are the ways that you can try to organize yourself a very particular goal, and then all your mantras go around this goal. And you tell to yourself, I've done it before, I've written 1,000 words yesterday and the day before yesterday and the day before that, I can still do that. One of the mechanisms that I sometimes use is I try to, especially if I'm writing several papers, now this is for more advanced scholars, and one of them I really struggle with and I don't enjoy, and I don't think it's very, it's not a lot of fun to do. Another one comes almost naturally to me. So I would always start my day with one that I don't like. And I would tell to myself that I'm going to work on it uninterrupted for at least half an hour. And after I've done that, I have permission to go to the other task. And then what would happen is, if in a half hour I've actually got into the real of a project, maybe I can work on it more, which is great, because then I actually get more work done on my hardest project, the one that I like the least. And if I don't succeed, then at least I did something, and then the shift to a project that I like more will give me more enthusiasm and I'm going to be able to work better in the following hours that I'm going to dedicate to that. So these are the mechanisms that you can use. One of the most important things, again, for these mantras to work is you have to keep a clean mind and you have to avoid distractions. So avoid any things that beeps or messages you from the phone or from the computer as you're working. That's very, very important. Avoid any other interruptions that could occur, people calling you or interrupting you as you write. And if you still have the temptation to, for example, go on websites that are not necessary as you're working, one of the things that I recommend to do is set a timer for yourself as you work. And then you know that as long as the timer is running, you're not allowed to do anything else. And I prefer a timer to a stopper because a timer will eventually beep once the time is over. So you don't have to kind of check yourself as you would do with a stopper to check whether the time already passed. So you put the timer for an hour, and all this hour you work very effectively, and that's a great way to keep yourself in a disciplined track and actually doing your work effectively. And now to the most important tip that I can give you about making disciplined and consistent progress, and that is documentation. Now, a lot of people think that you need to only plan ahead. So you need to plan what I will do tomorrow, what I will do next week, but not trying to document what I actually did. And that's a very, very big mistake. If you don't document what you did before, you will not improve. Unless you give yourself feedback on your actual progress, you are not going to succeed to do this continuously. The entire idea of keeping yourself disciplined and motivated is you can always look backwards and see how much I've done already, how many times have I succeeded. I'm able to do this. So I'm able to push myself forward in the future as well. So every day before you go to sleep, write down exactly what you did. How many words did you write? Did you finish an important chapter? Did you read a certain judgment, a certain paper that you need to read? Write all these things down very, very precisely. And it's important that you give yourself honest feedback, not just about these particular metrics. So it's important that we know how many words you've written, how many hours you worked. So you write exactly the hours in which you worked, when you were interrupted, and how many words did you produce. But it's also important that you give yourself honest feedback about the quality of the work. Was something bothering you? Did you not manage to concentrate? You're constantly looking at other websites with other interruptions. Write all these things down. Now, even if, ideally, of course, you reflect on these things and you try to improve and solve them in the future. But sometimes that's not always easy to do. And it's very important that you have your document, your archive of your progress, of all your problems and all your challenges and all your successes and all your the things that you're proud of written down, because eventually these archives will accumulate. And by accumulate, I don't mean that only you would look at them carefully and try to analyze them in the future. Maybe you can do that, then really it's a great congratulations that you're able to reach that level of efficiency. But even if you don't do that, I really believe that if you keep very detailed archives, eventually somehow in your brain these things come together. So if you do work consistently in regular hours, write a certain amount of words every day, and you write it down, somehow in your brain things work. Okay, you do it for half a year. The second half a year will be completely different. It will be much, much higher quality because somehow you process that. Again, if you're able to do it in a very conscious manner, so you're able to take your archives, take them apart and say, what could I have done better? How can I do it next year? Then that's an amazing thing that you can do, and I really recommend that. How do I keep my own archives? I've devised a system where every week is a separate page. So I have always on my computer a Word file in which I write what I did throughout the day. Where did I start working? How many hours did I work on one project? What did I do? What did I write? I write there with great accuracy a feedback to myself. Was the work good? Was the writing flowing? Was I interrupted? And how much did I produce in terms of words, hours, and subparts of a project that I'm working on now? In addition to that, in my own archive, I add everything else. So did I attend a workshop, for example? Every book that I ever finish appears there. Every workout that I ever do appears there with great detail. So I don't only write every single set that I do is written there, but I also write to myself comments. Do I have a pain somewhere in the body? Something went wrong in the workout? Everything like this is documented. Another important thing that I add there is important phone calls, important emails, passwords that I set to myself, transactions that I make, every money that I pass. These things turn out to be very important. Now, if I write in a font 8 or 7, I finished on one page a whole week. Then I'm going to cut and paste it to an archive file that has the whole year. And I have files like this going back almost to the beginning of my PhD, so almost 20 years. I keep files like this, and they are incredibly useful. Imagine, all your passwords are there, everything that you made that is important bureaucratically, you can always check that. Sometimes things pop up after 2 years, and you have to figure out how to do them again, who to contact. This is very, very useful. But the most important thing for our purposes is this archive keeps me always alert to how do I work well, how can I become more efficient. And sometimes I would go to this file and learn from it, but often it's just there, and the very fact that it's there helps me. I add one more thing. At the end of every week, I write a summary of the week, in which I don't mention all the details because they appear in a page there, but I try to really understand what are the main challenges that I faced. How can I do better? How can I improve? All these things I write in a nice paragraph that tries to say what did I do well at this week, and how can I use the lessons I learned in this week to become even better. So you do a summary of a week. Now, when I was a beginner of a PhD, I also did summaries for a month and summaries for a year. Now I do it less, maybe I should do it more, but I think that the more you do that, the better. I think that all these ways, so making a very detailed plan, preparing for tomorrow, using your mantras, writing in set hours, archiving what you did, giving yourself feedback, feed into a system that will make you a much, much better scholar and much more effective at writing a research project.